Welcome back to Crowned Black Heroes, where we uncover the extraordinary stories of black excellence that history tried to bury. Today, I'm going to tell you about a man who was born into slavery, who was legally considered property, who could be bought and sold like livestock. But this man refused to accept the limitations that a brutal system tried to impose on him. He escaped bondage, built a fortune through sheer brilliance and determination, and then did something so audacious, so poetic, so perfectly just that it sounds like fiction. He returned to the plantation where he had been enslaved and bought it. He became the master of the very land where he had once been a slave, where his family had suffered. This is not Hollywood fantasy. This is the true story of a man whose name should be taught in every history class in America, but isn't. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we bring you these powerful untold stories every single week. And if this story moves you, if it makes you want to stand up and shout about justice and redemption, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think. And the owner of his former master's plantation. We begin in 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina, in the heart of the antebellum South, where his mother, Lydia, is an enslaved woman who works as a house servant. From his earliest moments, Robert Smalls is property. He has no legal rights. He cannot own anything. He cannot marry legally. His children, if he has any, will also be property. He can be sold at any moment, separated from his mother, worked to death in the fields, or beaten for any perceived offense. This is the reality of slavery, not the sanitized version, sometimes taught in schools, but the actual lived horror of human beings treated as objects, as tools, as less than human. But Lydia witnesses a slave auction where families are torn apart, where children are sold away from their mothers, where human beings stand on blocks while white men examine their teeth and muscles like they're buying horses. Why would a mother subject her child to such trauma? Because Lydia understands something crucial. Robert, because of his light skin and his position as a house servant, might be tempted to think that slavery isn't really that bad, that if you just keep your head down and work hard, you can have a tolerable life. Lydia wants him to know the truth. He grows up with a burning awareness of the injustice of his condition and a determination to escape it. At age 12, Robert is sent to Charleston to work. His owner hires him out to. He's intelligent, observant, and ambitious. The white ship captains and pilots he works for recognize his abilities, though of course they would never acknowledge that an enslaved black man might be as smart or capable as they are. But there's a practice where enslaved people who are hired out can sometimes keep small amounts of money if they exceed their work quotas or if their temporary employers give them tips. Robert is meticulous about saving every penny he can. He has a dream, still vague, but growing stronger, of enslaved people cannot legally marry. But in their own eyes, and in the eyes of their community, Robert and Hannah are husband and wife. They begin to build a life together within the narrow constraints that slavery allows. He cannot bear the thought of his children growing up as he did, as property, with no control over their own lives. He begins to formulate a plan so daring and dangerous that if it fails, he will almost certainly be executed. By 1861, the Civil War has begun. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, and Charleston is a Confederate stronghold. Robert Smalls is working as a wheelman, essentially a pilot, on a Confederate transport ship called the Planter. The Planter is a cotton steamer that has been converted for military use, transporting troops, ammunition, and supplies for the Confederate Army. Robert's job gives him detailed knowledge of Confederate fortifications, passwords, and naval movements, and it gives him access to a ship. The plan that has been forming in his mind for years suddenly becomes possible. The Planter is commanded by a white crew, but the actual physical labor of running the ship, the loading, the maintenance, the piloting through Charleston's tricky waters is done by enslaved black men, including Robert Smalls. The white officers and captain live in Charleston and often spend nights at home rather than on the ship. This is the vulnerability that Robert plans to exploit. On the night of May 13th, 1862, Robert puts his plan into action. He has carefully recruited the other enslaved crew members, all of whom are taking an enormous risk. If they're caught, they will be tortured and executed as examples to other enslaved people. But they're also offered something infinitely precious, the chance at freedom. Under cover of darkness, with the white officers asleep in their homes, Robert and his crew quietly fire up the Planter's engines. They sail to a nearby wharf where Robert's wife Hannah, their 2 young children, and the families of the other crew members are waiting. Getting these families aboard is incredibly risky, but somehow, miraculously, they manage to get everyone on board. The Planter now carries 17 people, including men, women, and children, all gambling their lives on Robert. Smalls' knowledge and courage. Now comes the most dangerous part. To reach Union forces and freedom, the Planter has to sail out of Charleston Harbor, which means passing directly under the guns of multiple Confederate forts. Fort Moultrie guards the harbor entrance. There are other batteries and checkpoints. Each one requires the correct. The Planter approaches Fort Sumter. Robert gives they're cleared to pass. The Planter sails on. They pass Fort Moultrie. Again, the correct signals. Again, clearance. They're still in range of the Confederate guns, but they're getting closer to the harbor entrance, closer to open water, closer to the Union. Naval blockade and freedom. Finally, once they're beyond the range of Confederate artillery, Robert Smalls does something that must have felt like the most liberating action of his entire life. He hauls down the Confederate flag and raises a white bed sheet in surrender. He sails directly toward the USS Onward, a Union Navy ship that's part of the blockade. The Union sailors are initially confused and suspicious. Is this a Confederate trick? A suicide attack? But as the Planter gets closer, they can see black faces on deck. They can see women and children. Robert Smalls shouts across the water, identifying himself and explaining what he's done. He's just stolen a Confederate military vessel, delivered it to the Union Navy. This is one of the most audacious acts of the entire Civil War. Robert Smalls and his crew become instant heroes in the North. Their stories covered in newspapers across the Union. Frederick Douglass writes about Smalls' courage. President Abraham Lincoln meets with Smalls and is impressed by his intelligence and bravery. Smalls begins working for the Union Navy, using his intimate knowledge of southern waterways to pilot ships through dangerous coastal waters. He participates in multiple military operations, guiding Union forces through areas where no Northern pilot would dare to go. In 1863, Smalls is piloting the USS Planter, which is now a Union vessel, when it comes under heavy Confederate fire. The white captain panics and wants to surrender. Robert Smalls, who is technically just the pilot, not the commander, essentially takes control. He refuses to surrender and successfully navigates the ship out of danger, saving everyone on board. For this act of courage, Smalls is promoted and eventually given command of the Planter, making him one of the first black ship captains in U.S. military history. Think about that trajectory. From enslaved pilot to Union Navy captain in less than 2 years. But he's also thinking about the future. The war is ending. Slavery is being abolished. And Smalls is determined to help shape what comes next for black Americans in the South. Smalls returns to Beaufort, South Carolina, the town where he was born into slavery. During the war, Union forces captured Beaufort early, and many white plantation owners fled, abandoning their properties. The federal government began selling some of these abandoned properties to pay for war debts. And Robert Smalls, who has been saving his military pay and the prize money he received for capturing the planter, has resources. In 1863, even before the war ends, Robert Smalls, this is not just any house. This is the house where he was born. This is the house where his mother was enslaved. This is the house owned by his former master, Henry McKee. McKee had fled Beaufort when Union forces arrived, and the property had been seized by the federal government for unpaid taxes. Now Robert Smalls walking through the front door of the house where you were born into bondage, but now walking through as the owner, not as property. The woman who was once a slave in this house is now living there as a free woman, cared for by her son who owns the property. He uses his fame and his intelligence to build wealth years earlier. But Smalls understands that individual wealth, while important, is not enough. Racial hierarchy through terrorism and economic oppression. The Ku Klux Klan is murdering black people and white Republicans. Smalls knows that political power is essential if black people are going to have any chance at true freedom and equality. So he enters politics. He fights for public education, for civil rights. Political freedom is hollow. In 1874, Robert Smalls is elected to the United States House of Representatives. During his time in Congress, Smalls is a passionate advocate for civil rights and for the rights of black veterans. He fights against the growing movement to abandon Reconstruction and allow Southern states to reimpose white supremacy. Northern white politicians are growing tired of Reconstruction. The Compromise of 1877 effectively ends Reconstruction. Federal troops are withdrawn from the South. Southern states are allowed to disenfranchise black voters through poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright violence. The brief period of black political power in the South is over. He regains it briefly in 1882, but loses it again as white supremacist Democrats. While not technically slavery, shares many of slavery's characteristics: economic exploitation, political powerlessness, constant threat of violence, legal inequality. For many black Americans of Smalls' generation, this is a period of profound disappointment and grief. He serves in various state and local positions. He continues to advocate for black education and economic development, a physical manifestation of the possibility of black success and the reversal of slavery's power dynamics. The white people of Beaufort have complicated feelings about Robert Smalls. Some respect him, admiring his war heroism even as they oppose his politics. Others resent him deeply, seeing his success as an affront to white supremacy, seeing his ownership of Henry McKee's house as a humiliation of the white family. There are threats. There are attempts to drive him out, but Smalls stays. In 1895, South Carolina holds a constitutional convention. The explicit purpose is to find legal ways to disenfranchise black voters and enshrine white supremacy in the state's fundamental law. He talks about his life, his service to the country, his contributions to South Carolina. He talks about the contributions of black people to building the state, for the past history of them in this country proves them to be equal of any people anywhere. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life. He argues against the literacy tests and poll taxes being proposed, pointing collapses from over 90,000 in 1890 to just 5,500 by 1940. Robert Smalls lives to see the political rights he fought for essentially eliminated. But he also lives to see his children and grandchildren grow up free, educated, with opportunities that would have been unimaginable when he was born. His daughter, Elizabeth Lydia Smalls, attends college. His descendants go on to become teachers, professionals, contributing members of society. A testament to one man's journey from slavery to success. Robert Smalls dies on February 23, 1915, at the age of 75. His funeral in Beaufort is attended by thousands, both black and white. Stories like Robert Smalls's complicate the racial narrative that white Americans are telling themselves. Despite every obstacle that slavery and racism could place in his path, became a war hero, a ship captain, a businessman, a millionaire, a state legislator, a congressman. Here's a man who literally navigated a ship loaded with ammunition past multiple Confederate forts in the dark, using only his knowledge and courage and determination. How do you maintain the myth of black inferiority in the face of a life like that? You can't. So for much of the 20th century, Robert Smalls's story was simply not told, or it was minimized. Historians, particularly black historians, kept Robert Smalls's story alive. They documented his achievements, preserved the records, told the story to new generations. And gradually, slowly, Smalls began to receive the recognition he deserves. In 2004, a statue of Robert Smalls was erected in Beaufort, South Carolina, depicting him in his Union Navy uniform. Most Americans, if you ask them about the Civil War, can think about the intelligence and think about the poetic justice of buying the house where you were born a slave and living there as the owner, as the master of your own destiny. Robert Smalls's life is a story about the indomitable human spirit, about refusing to accept the limitations that others try to impose, about having the courage to risk everything for freedom, and about using that freedom to fight for justice, not just for yourself, but for your entire community. But Smalls's story is also a tragedy in some ways. He lived to see the promise of Reconstruction betrayed. He lived to see black people pushed back into subjugation through legal and extra-legal violence. He lived to see the voting rights he fought for stripped away. The America that Robert Smalls died in 1915, was in many ways more hostile to black equality than the America of the 1870s when he served in Congress. It must have been heartbreaking for him and for his generation of black leaders who had believed that emancipation and Reconstruction represented a permanent change, only to watch white supremacy reassert itself with a vengeance. Yet even in that disappointment and failure, Smalls's life stands as a testament to what was possible, to what could have been if America had been willing to truly commit to racial equality, and to what black people could achieve when given even a slight opportunity. Imagine what Robert Smalls could have accomplished if he had been born free, if he had access to formal education, if he had lived in a society that judged him on his abilities rather than his race. Imagine how many other Robert Smalls might have existed. Enslaved people with equal intelligence and courage and determination who never got the chance to show what they could do because they were worked to death in cotton fields or sold away from their families or broken by the brutality of slavery. That's what slavery stole from America. Not just the freedom and lives of the enslaved, though that alone is an incalculable moral crime, but also the contributions those people might have made, the innovations they might have created, the leadership they might have provided. Every enslaved person was a potential Robert Smalls, a potential genius or leader or innovator whose talents were suppressed and destroyed by a system that treated them as property. And even after slavery ended, Jim Crow segregation continued to suppress and destroy black talent for another century. We'll never know what America could have been if it had truly embraced racial equality from the beginning, if it had valued black lives and black contributions the way it valued white lives and white contributions. But Robert Smalls gives us a glimpse. He shows us what was possible. He shows us what one man could achieve, even against almost impossible odds. And his story challenges us to ask, what could we be as a country if we finally truly committed to racial equality and end justice? What talents are we still suppressing through systemic racism, through unequal education, through mass incarceration, through all the ways that American society continues to devalue black lives? How many modern-day Robert Smalls are out there right now? People with incredible potential who will never get the chance to show what they can do because the system is stacked against them. These are uncomfortable questions, but they're questions that Robert Smalls' life forces us to confront. His story is not just historical inspiration. It's a challenge to the present and to the future. It's a demand that we recognize Black excellence not as an exception, but as a constant reality that has been systematically suppressed and erased throughout American history. It's an insistence that we tell the truth about the past so that we can build a better future. And it's a reminder that change is possible, that systems that seem permanent and unbreakable can be challenged and overcome. That individuals with courage and determination can change history even when all the power structures are arrayed against them. Robert Smalls was born into a system designed to break him, to make him believe he was less than human, to extract his labor and then discard him. He refused to be broken. He seized his freedom. He built a fortune. He bought his master's house. He served his country in war and in Congress. He fought for justice for his people, even when that fight seemed hopeless. That's heroism. That's excellence. That's a life that deserves to be celebrated and remembered and taught to every generation of Americans. The house at 511 Prince Street in Beaufort still stands today. You can visit it. You can walk through the rooms where Robert Smalls was born into slavery and where he later lived as the owner. You can stand in that physical space and feel the weight of that transformation, from slave to master, from property to proprietor. It's a powerful experience and a powerful symbol. But the real legacy of Robert Smalls is not in that house or in the statues or in the history books. The real legacy is in the example he set, the proof he provided that Black people are capable of anything, that slavery and racism are lies that tried to suppress human excellence, but could never actually destroy it. Every Black person who achieves success today, who breaks barriers, who refuses to accept the limitations that society tries to impose, is walking a path that Robert Smalls helped clear. Every American who fights for racial justice and equality is continuing the work that Smalls dedicated his life to. And every person who learns his story and shares it and insists that it be taught is helping to undo the historical erasure that kept his achievements hidden for far too long. Before I close, I want you to think about the next time you hear someone say that enslaved people were not capable of complex thought or leadership, that they needed to be enslaved for their own good, or any of the other lies that are still sometimes told about slavery. Remember Robert Smalls. Remember that he navigated a Confederate ship through multiple armed checkpoints in the dark. Remember that he became a ship captain, a millionaire, a congressman. Remember that he bought the house where he was born a slave. And ask yourself, if enslaved people were really as incapable as slavery's defenders claimed, how could Robert Smalls have accomplished all of that? The answer is obvious. Slavery was never about the capabilities of enslaved people. It was about power and exploitation and maintaining racial hierarchy through violence and law. Robert Smalls' life destroys every justification for slavery that was ever offered. And his story needs to be told until every American knows his name. If this story inspired you, if it made you want to learn more about Robert Smalls and other Black heroes whose stories have been erased, if it made you angry that you weren't taught this in school, then I need you to act right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to Crowned Black Heroes and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you these powerful stories of Black excellence that changed history. And most importantly, drop a comment below. Tell me what you think about Robert Smalls' incredible journey. Tell me if you knew his story before watching this video. Tell me what other stories of Black achievement you want to hear. Let's build a community dedicated to uncovering and celebrating the truth of Black history. Share this video with everyone you know. Make sure Robert Smalls' story spreads far and wide. Make sure the next generation learns his name, and knows what he achieved. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for caring about truth and justice. Thank you for being willing to confront the uncomfortable realities of American history and to celebrate the heroes who fought against oppression. Robert Smalls deserves to be remembered as one of the great Americans, period. Not just one of the great Black Americans, but one of the great Americans, full stop. His courage, his intelligence, his determination, and his commitment to justice make him a model for all of us. Share his story, honor his legacy, and join me next time as we uncover another incredible story of Black excellence that history tried to erase. Until then, stay inspired, stay committed to truth, and keep fighting for a world where everyone's achievements are recognized and celebrated. Peace.